And thinking about people like Meena reminds me every time that it would be worth it. We easily take identity for granted. But can you imagine what life would be like if you had no identity, at least on paper? There was once an Indian girl named Meena. Meena was around 11 years old and lived in a village in North India when she was suddenly kidnapped by a human trafficker and locked up in a brothel in the town of Katihar. This marked for Meena the beginning of a life of indescribable abuse and forced prostitution. She joined some million children worldwide who are currently victims of human trafficking around the world. You see, it's hard for these children to be freed from the modern-day slave trade they're caught up in because they don't have public identity records. They are nameless, they're faceless, they're not just difficult for us to find or identify, they're difficult for us to relate with. When you don't have an identity, you are just a statistic. People have been trying to solve the issue of ID-less children for a while now. Entrepreneur John Edge was moved when he watched a movie based on Meena's story, and he started considering the role of blockchain technology as a universal proof of identity. The blockchain is the technology that currently enables cryptocurrencies. And so the difference between blockchain transactions and transactions made through banks or money transfer agency is very simple. For banks or money transfer agencies, if I want to send money to my mother, I rely on a third-party corporation to make sure the money arrives safely in my mom's account. But with the blockchain, there's no need for a third party in the middle. There's no more need for a corporation between my mom and me. She no longer needs to give away her identity to an institution for me to send her something. She just needs to give me her address or public key, and she can get the money right away. This was actually the point of Bitcoin and blockchain. This is why it was invented. It's one single purpose: taking out the middleman. Bitcoin was invented actually in 2008, right after the financial crisis hit the entire world and people realized how irresponsible and greedy banks could get with people's hard-earned money. The goal of Satoshi Nakamoto, the guy who invented Bitcoin, was to make it possible to send and receive money with no intermediary institution. And so when John Edge founded ID 2020 in 2014 to help fight against human trafficking and child abuse worldwide, he had one idea in mind. The blockchain technology, the tech used by Bitcoin, would solve the problem of children with no IDs. What he sought to do was simple: establishing secure digital identities for all the world's children by the year 2020. It was a simple goal, but it wasn't easy to achieve, and it also raised a lot of questions. For example, in Meena's case, who would confirm that Meena's name was really Meena? And until she would be an adult, who would keep her private key for her? But the most complicated issue, the one that proved to be extremely difficult to address, had to do with the current existing identity controllers. You see, there are already systems in charge of identifying persons right now, and they're not too happy with giving up control of our identities. For example, governments. Until recently, governments were the only ones truly in charge of confirming our identities. And frankly, I don't think they're doing too bad. The governments of the 5 largest countries are more or less capable to confirm the identities of billions of people. China does it for 1.4 billion people. Same for India. The United States does it for 330 million people. Indonesia 270 million, and Pakistan 212 million. The numbers speak for themselves. Governments do some pretty serious heavy lifting when it comes to identifying population. And they're not willing to surrender the work of population identification. And one can understand why. How would they provide the proper services to their people? How would they protect them? How would they keep them accountable? How would they tax them? So it's clear that governments should have a say on the identity business. And actually, many governments are quite open to the concept of digital identity. India, for example, has successfully assigned unique IDs to 1.37 billion people through a system that they created that's called Aadhaar. And this is one great example of governments who are proactive in modernizing their identity systems. These governments will only be better at serving their peoples and making sure that they are protected. But this strategy has risks. The problem is that governments keep all the information in centralized databases. Even if they can mitigate the massive danger of security breaches, of hackers, of tampering, what about the scenario where governments become rogue or tyrannical? Then the system would actually endanger their population. For example, India has currently a moderate regime right now. But what if the right-wing nationalist BJP party comes in power? This party has a history of stirring hostility against Muslim minorities in the country. Would the Muslims in the country still be safe? Because suddenly some antagonistic regime would be in possession of their personal and financial information, their addresses, and could impact their ability to receive government services. So that's a worst case scenario, but even for the best governments, the risk of abuse of its people's privacy and personal information should never be minimized. And if you ever doubt it, just ask Edward Snowden. But let's leave governments for now. It's actually a very complex issue, and I'm not trying to get political here. The other organizations that are more interesting to me and that control people's identities are social networks and corporations. Corporations like Facebook or Meta or X, formerly Twitter, or Instagram, WhatsApp, Uber, the usual suspects. They control the identities and information of about 1.2 billion people right now, and they at least know your personal email and your phone number. But they also usually know much more. They know your name, your age, your physical appearance, your relationships, your personal preferences, your political affiliations, your search history, and much more. So how can I say this mildly? They know you. They know who you are. They're different from governments though. Governments need to know you. They need to know information about you to provide you with the services you need and to keep you in check. Corporations are just trying to make profit. As you continually engage with social networks, they capture the complex aspects of your identity and in a strange, unnatural way, condense them in one profile. Almost as if the plan was to package, organize, shelf, and resell it. When Facebook started collecting my information along with that of half of the world population, they became an intermediary for my connection to the world, to businesses, to advertisers, and even to my friends. In exchange for being able to prove that I am who I say I am, I had to provide as much information as possible, starting by my personal email or my phone number. And so with social networks, you are only indirectly giving your data to the person you're trying to connect with. You're really giving it to Facebook, allowing them to monetize it or demonetize it as they see fit. They own your information. And unless you're a popular influencer or some sort of superstar, you're not getting paid for this. The best you often get from all this is the dopamine rush of a few dozen likes. Governments control your identity because they have to. Networks control your identity to make money. Now, I can imagine what you might be thinking. All right, Nathan, we get it. Social networks are bad, blah, blah. Now what? Is there even a way around this? Is it really that bad? You know what? Let me suggest to you a concept that I introduced previously in a previous vlog that's called self-sovereign identity. The idea of self-sovereign identity means that the control of your identity is no longer with corporations or institutions, but with you. Alexander Gillis explains, self-sovereign identity is a model for managing digital identities in which individuals or businesses have sole ownership over the ability to control their accounts and personal data. Individuals with self-sovereign identity can store their data to their devices and provide it for verification and transactions without the need to rely upon a central repository of data. With self-sovereign identity, users have complete control over how their personal information is kept and used. With self-sovereign identity, it's easy for you to share some, all, or none of your information. The idea is that everyone is agnostic of who you are. But whenever you really want to prove to a specific person that you are who you really say you are, you can. There are pros and cons to self-sovereign identity, though. It's not a utopia. The pros are great. It is more secure and prevents common attacks to personal data, such as breaches. Your data is much more private. Users have a higher control over their own data. The process is more efficient because it's less centralized. Users do not have to rely on identity providers that may sell or monetize their data. The disadvantages, though, are also there. Users are now responsible for their own security. It's no longer corporations, but you are now responsible for identity. Multiple identity platforms may be required, meaning that you have to set up multiple apps. Keeping track of personal data and permissions can be complex. Certain data intermediaries may not be removable. You may still need a certain centralized database for certain types of data. And proof data is unstructured and can easily be faked. Now, these issues mean that to successfully achieve self-sovereign identity, we'll have to work together to address the technical and social challenges pertaining to it. But if we do this right, we might just achieve the greatest degree of freedom, safety, and personal fulfillment ever experienced in the history of mankind. And thinking about people like Meena reminds me every time that it would be worth it. Nodis, my social network, harness the power of the blockchain technology to make self-sovereign identity accessible to all, while limiting the risks. When you sign up, we give you a private key that you can save in your photos. Only you will ever know what that private key looks like. We don't store it. It never leaves your phone. And so what that means is that Nodis doesn't know who you are. We don't have your personal email. We don't have your phone number. We don't retain any identifying information other than what you're willing to give us for specific purposes. And I love what I'm doing with Nodis because it proves one very important point. You don't need a corporation or government to know who you are in order to connect with your friends and your family and your business partners. You just need them. And so this is really the end of this video. This is pretty quick introduction to self-sovereign identity. These videos take a lot of work to do. If you do find them interesting, I would appreciate any like, share, or comment. Thanks for watching, and please take care. Cheers.